I loved this book. It's very different from Claudia Gray's other Star Wars book, Lost Stars, but it still has that easy flow to it that Lost Stars had. I think one of the reasons Lost Stars worked so well in an era of Disney not allowing anything of consequence to happen in the novels is because it focused on two new and unknown characters, allowing Claudia Gray to actually let us wonder whether the characters would even survive to the end of the book. It was refreshing considering we've had books about assassination attempts on Vader and the Emperor in Lords of the Sith, the story of Galen Erso and Orson Krennic pre-Rogue One in Catalyst, and the abomination that was Heir to the Jedi. Even in Thrawn, we knew the titular character would survive because it led up to Rebels, although Zahn did surprise me with that twist at the end. I think out of all the new canon novels I've read, only Lost Stars, Dark Disciple and Twilight Company had characters where I was really unsure if they would survive, and it's this lack of wondering combined with no plot of actual galactic significance that can make this new canon seem predictable and boring. So having a plot where something that affects the entire Star Wars galaxy and having main characters that may not survive the book adds an extra layer of enjoyment and makes me more invested in what I'm reading. Bloodline focuses entirely on Princess Leia. It's still third person, but it's like a Harry Potter book in that it always follows Leia. We know Leia won't die since Bloodline is a prequel to The Force Awakens, but Claudia Gray manages to surround Leia with 4 or 5 well done characters that do leave you guessing. I shouldn't have been guessing though, because most of these characters are actually seen in The Force Awakens. Had I been a kid again and getting ready for The Phantom Menace to be released, I would have had the sticker book for The Force Awakens before it was released and would have known all the characters' names by heart. But I'm not, so I didn't. And I think that, like Death Star, Bloodline could have done with a dramatis personae page at the beginning, just so you know who these characters are and can put a face to their names. The only character I knew for a fact was in The Force Awakens was Corsella, and the only reason I know that is because the actress who plays her also plays Amaya in Legends of Tomorrow, and she is fucking gorgeous. Having said that, the way the book ends left me thinking that this character might be that character from The Force Awakens, and that character might be this guy, and doing a quick search on Wikipedia gave me the answers I needed, so maybe not having a dramatis personae page was the right way to go. Bloodline was very entertaining, but the main event of the book happened much later than I thought it would. Given that the promotional art for Bloodline had Leia with a Darth Vader mask graffitied over her face, it was pretty obvious that her heritage would come to light in the public view. So I was somewhat disappointed that I had to wait until 2/3 of the way through before that actually happened. Acts 1 and 2 are still good though, and they do set the third act up very well, but I wish the big event of the book had happened a bit earlier, since that's what I was waiting for. Ransom Castafoe was an interesting character. I think he easily gets the most character development in the book, and it doesn't feel forced. Claudia Gray has done an excellent job of using his political work and encounters with Leia to drive his changing character without making it seem like it was done purely to advance the book. One thing I never understood about him though was his collection of Imperial artifacts. Throughout the book he makes it clear that he hated Palpatine's empire, but agrees with the idea of an empire with a good and just leader. He even states that his family died because of Vader and the Emperor, and his world was left with nothing to export anymore since the Empire mined it dry. I can understand that, but it just makes no sense to me that he hates that particular empire, but collects Imperial artifacts. That would be like any person saying they hate Nazis, their family were killed by Nazis, but they like the idea of strong leadership, so they go out and start buying World War II Nazi armbands and gas masks. It just makes no sense whatsoever. It's a good idea for a character, but in terms of reading, it's really difficult to get behind that little character quirk, and I think it's something that should have been left out because it seems to directly contradict Castafoe's history and morals. Leia's character was done well too, by seeing another Senate that simply won't stop bickering and start compromising in order to let positive changes start happening. She's become weary with politics and sees her days in the rebellion with a lot of nostalgia. During the book, she does try to stay on the political side of things, but through necessity and in typical Star Wars fashion, it quickly evolves into an adventure. It's nice to see Leia this close to The Force Awakens, walking a line between action and politics. Allegedly, the great cock known as Rian Johnson contributed ideas and storylines to Bloodline, but I can only find one quote supporting this. According to Pablo Hidalgo, the disposition of the New Republic, its political factions, and the napkin incident were pieces that came from Rian. So what that really means is, Johnson stole George's idea of the backbone of the entire prequel trilogy, stole one of George's stories from the Clone Wars, and regurgitated it to Claudia Gray as if they were his own ideas. As if it wasn't bad enough that he got to make a Star Wars film when he clearly has no idea what he's doing, now he's plagiarising George Lucas and putting it forward to an author and taking credit for it. What a fucking dickhead. The sooner Disney gets rid of him, the better. It still made an enjoyable read, but he shouldn't take credit for copying other people's work, and considering how much I enjoyed Lost Stars, I would say Claudia Gray doesn't need any help from someone like Johnson. She writes well enough on her own, and she does it without plagiarising. There's another review I'm working on which is coming soon, where I give 3 more examples of his plagiarism from one book. So it's definitely not a one-time thing, and definitely not an accident. He's a thief, and he's talentless. I was a bit disappointed considering my biggest issue with Lost Stars was the way the book ended on a cliffhanger, and was hoping that we would find out the fate of Ciena Ree in Bloodline, whether she became a martyr of the Empire or whether she was released from New Republic custody. I was hoping she was cleared or received a small sentence, and would have liked to see Ciena working as one of Leia's senatorial aides though. One way or another, at least it would have wrapped up Lost Stars, and I feel by not doing that, by not even mentioning the fate of Ciena Ree and Thane Kyrell in passing, the fans who have now read 2 of Claudia Gray's books are still left in the dark, and I don't think that's the way you should treat fans. Write a story, give it a conclusion, stop cock-blocking people. If your story is forced to be released early and you leave the book at a cliffhanger, wrap it up in your next book. Give the fans the respect they deserve. I've heard she wants to write a sequel to Lost Stars and will if Disney give it the green light, but I feel like those 2 characters have run their time, and it's unnecessary to have any more of them other than wrapping up their fates. If that's the case, then I doubly wish she'd have wrapped up their stories in Bloodline, because she could be waiting forever for Disney to okay a sequel, which means we could be waiting forever to find out what happened to those 2. There's also a continuity error. It's small, and I know I'm being really anal about it, but it still isn't acceptable, and I blame Disney for this, since Star Wars is their baby now, and they're making the rules and the stories. Disney have said that everything they release is now canon. Everything they ever will release will be canon. There is no more multiple ideas of what's canon and what's not except for Legends, but to be fair to Disney, since day one they have made it clear Legends is no longer canon, so at least we know where we stand with that. However, Bloodline was released in 2016, the same year as Rogue One. At the end of Rogue One, and I know, I'll say it again, I know I'm being anal about this, but if they're gonna say everything is canon, they need to make sure everything matches up, no matter how small it is. At the end of Rogue One, when Vader goes after the Death Star plans, we see the rebel soldiers relay a disc with the plans on it, and that disc eventually makes its way into Princess Leia's hands. It's literally handed to her by a rebel soldier, and it's the same disc we see her put into R2 at the beginning of A New Hope. In Bloodline, Princess Leia said she got the Death Star plans out of the Tantive 4's computer, when in Rogue One we see they were never in the computer and were handed to her directly. It can't be both. The plans were either handed to her or she got them out of the ship's computer. One of them is canon, and one of them isn't. And what pisses me off about this is that it's not the fault of Claudia Gray's, it's Disney's. Disney knew they had plans regarding this situation and didn't enlighten the people that needed to know about it, and the result is, just like in Shattered Empire, a story that contradicts another story, so we're left wondering which is canon. What makes this offence even more worse is that Bloodline was released in May and Rogue One was released in December. Usually the last thing that happens to a movie before it's ready for release is the special effects, which means Rogue One had finished filming by May. Which means if Disney were actually watching what they were doing with Star Wars, they would have caught this continuity error. Aside from that, Bloodline was released in May and Rogue One was released in December, so someone should have been watching Rogue One to make sure there were no errors like this. Like I said, it's a small, insignificant detail, but if a titan like Disney wants to say everything is canon, and they want to take our money, then they need to make sure nothing that's released contradicts anything else, and make sure everything fits together in one cohesive story. I say this in every review because in every book I read there's something that contradicts an event in another book or movie, and it's always Disney, and I don't know why they're doing this. They say everything we release from now on will be canon, and then they give two options for the same event. They need to fucking sort it out. I feel like I've done a lot of moaning about Bloodline, but it's not really Bloodline that's the issue. To be clear, I loved it, and I even read the last 100 pages in one day, which is quite rare for me. It even got me back into the Star Wars books, because after reading Empire's End, I just kinda switched off the books for a while, and then after reading Lords of the Sith a few months later, I was still uninspired to continue with the books. But I enjoyed Lost Stars and had faith in Claudia Gray, and that faith was rewarded. Bloodline is a good book with a good story, and it has good character definition and growth. Even though Luke isn't in it and Han is barely in it, I still felt like it was a solid novel. Something I really liked about Bloodline was the fact that this book has consequences and directly sets up and explains exactly how the First Order managed to creep its way into the galaxy. It's nice to read a Star Wars book that can have something as important as that in it. I know the First Order is already in The Force Awakens, but it's still a breath of fresh air to see their rise of prominence detailed in a book, something I didn't think that would happen. To be honest, at this point, I expected Disney to announce a standalone movie explaining how the First Order arrived and what they were doing before they did. It's also worth noting that for some reason Disney doesn't add years to the new timeline. They do print the order of the adult books but leave out the young adult books though, but it would be nice to have a proper timeline. If I had to guess, I'd say it's because they want to be able to play around with events, so when they create a new event they can say it happened before or after something else without worrying about it not matching in terms of exact time. In some books, if you read carefully enough, you can work out what year it is, and there was something in Bloodline that made me think it was set 6 years before The Force Awakens. I've heard all sorts, from 20 years after Return of the Jedi to a couple of years before Episode 7. I can't remember what it was, but something definitely made me think 6 years when I was reading Bloodline. But people wouldn't have to guess if Disney printed the years on the timeline like they did in the old expanded universe. At the moment, without the years, it feels like the early years of the old expanded universe when they didn't print any timeline at all. What really brings this book down for me is the knowledge outside of the book, in the real world. Rian Johnson plagiarising George Lucas, Disney not getting their continuity right, lack of proper timeline, that sort of thing. I really did enjoy Bloodline though, and Claudia Gray's writing is as good, if not better, than in Lost Stars. Bloodline is fantastic. Claudia Gray is fantastic. It's the second book I've read by her, and I'm looking forward to reading Leia, Princess of Alderaan. Bloodline is another book by Gray that shows how much she loves Star Wars and that she cares about what she's creating and wants to create an interesting story. And this was exactly the kind of author and book I needed after reading the heartless, soulless piece of shit known as the Aftermath trilogy. Bloodline is a good fun book that does a great job of supporting the backstory of The Force Awakens without stepping on its toes. Read Bloodline without thinking about anything else, and it's a really good book, easily one of the best in the new canon.